Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, one of HR.com's podcasts. HR.com is where I'm executive community leader of the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management online community. And as my guests today, I have Lisa Teague and Bill Larkin. Lisa is founder and director of Emory Consulting Services, where Bill is managing partner. Welcome to you both.
Well, we're excited to be here.
Thank you, Brent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about this particular conversation today. When you folks approached me with this topic, I thought, what's the word when somebody says, eureka, like this is exactly what we need to be talking about. There's another word I was thinking of, the funny Sherlock Holmes character on Sesame Street. But anyway, Lisa, maybe you could start us off. I'm going to ask you both kind of just chime in here. What kind of galvanizes you, gets you going during the day in the world of human capital management? Why is it that Emory Consulting Services exists? What do you do? How do you help folks? And then we'll get into our topic.
Excellent. Well, I'll start if it's okay, Bill. So Emory Consulting Services, we really take pride in being independent experts. And when we say independent, we really mean that in the sense that we're not aligned with any service provider or vendor or solution, particularly around HCM and payroll. And where I really am, passionate is I've been in the payroll space for 30 years. I have produced payroll at very large and small organizations globally. I can produce payroll in 30 countries pretty proficiently with the help of vendors and solutions. But through that trajectory and all that learning, I've really come across helping executives, HR executives, finance executives think through this topic, this payroll complexity, this payroll vendor technology, and the resourcing. And so I'll stop because I'll just keep going and going.
Hey, we'll have plenty of time for that. And I'm looking forward to it. We had some really interesting green room conversations just now. Bill, what do you have to add to that? Because we had a conversation first a couple of weeks ago.
And so as a managing partner here, one of my key roles is to listen to clients and prospects. And that's what I do most of the time. And I found three things in my conversations, or three categories of things, which I call now, Brent, the perfect storm, because the really negative or adverse effects of what's happening in the payroll. And we've been specific on payroll. And with those three things are really compliance is number one. And I'll put risk along with that. The compliance has gotten exponentially more difficult, and the risk has gotten exponentially more difficult for payroll and payroll department, particularly when you look at global. The second piece is, and I've been close to the vendor community for many, many years. The second piece that we're finding is that the vendor support seems to be less so than it used to be. Their services and their technology, by the way, a lot of their technology is old, but their services have diminished as well. And then the third thing that we're seeing is that the payroll departments themselves, although increased risk and increased compliance, are under-resourced. And so I'm hearing those three common themes on everybody I talk to, different forms or fashions, but that's what we're hearing a lot.
Yeah, and that is our topic for today. And thank you for sort of encapsulating it for our audience. You're absolutely correct. It is a perfect storm. I mean, we have this ever exponentiating risk and complexity in payroll with people are expecting to be paid on demand with earned wage access, for example, and have global expansion, which immediately adds complexity to your payroll, all sorts of things there. And then you have the technology where, despite all the chatter in the market space, maybe it's not quite up to snuff, or it's not quite doing everything that it's purported to. And you have services, which, it really isn't, you're doing your customers a disservice if let's put it this way, you could have the greatest technology. You could have a great technology for payroll, and WFM and the rest of HCM. Just say, hey, okay, there you go. Go use it. And the customer could fall flat on their face, without a good support network in place, in the form of services. So you're absolutely right about that. And so it's sort of a double whammy or a triple whammy, I guess, that these, in general, across the board, payroll departments are being under-resourced. They don't have the funding they need to hire the folks that they need to deal with these systems that maybe require a little bit more manual hand holding than you might think. So those are my initial thoughts on the matter.
I agree, and I frequently get called once, twice a week by various HR executives and finance executives, kind of perplexed with the problems that you've just said. Some of them come and say, geez, I have these set of circumstances. Which way should I go? Because our firm is really in the business of being very highly focused and deeply knowledgeable in this area. And typically executives kind of call each other, who would you call? Who could tell us about that? And so actually, a lot of times it's a referral from another colleague. When we do come in, there's typically a brewing, crisis is a strong word, but there's a brewing issue. And they've kind of gone off and read periodicals and consulted with other colleagues and heard from the vendor community, yet they're perplexed. And I would have to say, when I talk with those executives, even yet today and last Friday, they've made huge investments in HCM. They've made huge investments in the last 5-10 years. And they're not getting that return, or they're still in peril, or they're still struggling to have the services and the compliance. And so we typically come in and we do an assessment. Mm-hmm. So we evaluate the payroll function itself. Sometimes folks like me have been there a very long time. Really strong payroll people are technology averse. I'm not going to kid you. But sometimes they need a mentor, somebody to walk alongside them that understands the complexities of payroll. Yet payroll management is expected to know it all day long. And so that's one thing that I find, hey, you've got a great payroll manager director. They need some, mentoring. They need somebody to turn to. Hey, geez, we've got this thing going on, this issue. How do I look at this? We also look at the controls. These systems of today are meant to be completely self-serve, have AI, have all this business, and a lot of the vendors even sell this as part of their features, that it's touchless, employees do it all. However, that does not mean it's compliant. It doesn't mean the controls are in place. So sometimes we get called in when there's fraud, suspicion of fraud, or just, loss of wages through perhaps over-reporting. So we look at the process and the controls in place, and we look at the technology utilization. Yes, we could have the best system in the whole world, but if we hadn't built it in the beginning with all of those controls, features, and so forth, it really doesn't stand up to day-to-day rigor that our organizations have. And finally, we look at compliance and risk. If you go out and look on any of the job boards and you pulled up a payroll director or a global payroll director, you would have a list of requirements that role has to fill, that if you were to compare it with other jobs in the organization, it's pretty lofty. Mm. You have to manage the vendor. You need to know global compliance. You need to be able to manage the staff. You have to get payroll out timelessly, flawlessly, and accurately. Not to say that that's not what our goals are, but the support network to support that. folks say to me, geez, you've had all these experiences. We don't see that in the newspaper. We don't see payrolls failing. You don't. You don't. You won't. Companies need to protect that because they sell their products and they have put a lot of investment into these systems. So you won't necessarily hear that. You won't hear, boy, the payroll vendor or the solution we bought has really let us down. You won't hear that. So
That's interesting.
it is. And recently there was a study commissioned, and they came back with the key findings that they learned during their study. And this study was produced March of 24, so a year ago, and they said the number one issues that organizations were struggling with was the global payroll costs were underestimated. I think that's, true. I don't know if you've seen that, Brent, in your neck of the woods.
Well, I'm not surprised by that because nobody's ready for global payroll and all of a sudden they need to do it, right? And that I wrote about that several years ago. Gosh, it's 4 years ago, I guess. I wrote about this. The road to global payroll is long and winding.
Yeah.
But what's funny is that once you get there, it's suddenly there, and it's something that's not necessarily that easy to plan for, right? Because you really don't know what you're going to need until you find out that you're expanding into whatever region it's going to be. Nobody's that well plotted out and deliberate in terms of growing their business from the beginning. Oh, we're going to be in Denmark next and in March 3 years from now. It doesn't go that way, right? And so maybe sometimes. But in any event, so it does not surprise me at all that the cost of it, and I think you said the cost and also complexity of it is underestimated. There is, that's why we have an employer of record market space out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have global managed payroll, aggregators, these sorts of things, right? Because this gets into all sorts of topics, and I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but there's talk of developing a global payroll engine, like a viable technology for that, and that is not that we're not nowhere near that, right? So there could be, so there are solutions though for it, so it's quite interesting that piece of it, absolutely. Bill, I just want to ask you a quick question here around, in terms of the topic and the types of challenges that Lisa delineated there and that sort of thing. What is there a certain sort of customer engagement? Obviously, names will remain anonymous, but there's certain engagement that sort of comes to mind that sort of embodies some or maybe all three pieces of this perfect storm that you can recall.
Yeah. So I'll give an example of one customer that we've had. And by the way, this is related to multiple customers over the last years. Lisa and I have been doing this for longer than we want to admit sometimes. But what we found is that these organizations, and let me talk well about the vendors for a second, because the technology is not formable. It's not formable. In most cases, it does what you want. So let me set that aside for a second. But what we found is that the clients are unprepared to use new technology. And the reason is the payroll people particularly are not necessarily taking their advice during the selection process or the implementation process. And what's happened, we believe, and it's HCM in general, but payroll specifically, is the payroll department will be given, here's the new technology, make it work, it's new technology. And so we see this over and over and over, that the technology probably will most of the time. And so what we found is that it really needs to be a blended approach. It can't be just the payroll people and the technology. It can't be just external consultants and the technology. It has to be a blended approach of everybody and the expertise that's needed to do these types of things because it's so complex. Now, the payroll departments we found can't hire enough people, or payroll people are relatively expensive these days, hire people and pay those wages because that's expensive for the company too. So when we've had this last client we just talked about was a blended approach between us and the vendor and the client, and we got it done and we got it done correctly. So it's starting to satisfy those things. We're very careful of the compliance and risk piece of it. We're very supportive of the client in managing through the vendor and the vendor problems that they present. And I don't mean to denigrate the vendors. They're pretty good. We need to work through that. And then the last piece of it is that it keeps the client companies from having to overinvest in this by using external consultant like us. So they have those resources to do what they need to do. Did that answer your question, Brent?
Yeah, it does. It does. Absolutely. And I think this is a great segue because Lisa, you were sharing a few minutes ago, again, in the green room. We're not a late night talk show, but we do have a green room here at Future Payroll and Workforce Management. And you mentioned that a very large employer had reached out to you, and they actually had a failed implementation with a modern, I'm assuming any modern technology for payroll and HCM would be, cloud-based. So maybe you could just share a little bit around that. That really, we hear about failed implementations. They happen. I'd love to just kind of, pick your brain on that one a little bit.
Sure. So this particular group, and we're having continued conversations as they're trying to peel back some of the issues. But if I just in general terms talk about it, one of the circumstances that lead to it, in my experience, is that they choose one cloud vendor to do everything. Okay, and so sometimes in the design phase, that might work for some, it might not work for others, right? But in the design phase, sometimes it's okay to say, hey, this facet of it, whatever, we can say all kinds of things about the different facets of it. We don't need to invest in this massive portion of the system. We don't need that. Our requirements, so again, that design that Bill was talking about, what do we need for each of those components and facets that center around HCM, but around payroll, time, tax, pay, all those areas, especially in global. So I think they had put all of it into one system, and they really are struggling because components of the payroll and time are not functioning in that one cloud, because that is not the foundation of that cloud system. It's meant to do and was built upon certain premises.
Would you say that this is a challenge common to very large organizations that maybe they sort of drink the Kool-Aid and they say, yeah, let's have one suite for the entire, end-to-end HCM suite for the entire business. Is this sort of a common
Yes, yeah, because a lot of organizations said, oh, they offer all these suites, and why wouldn't I put all of this together? Because then I don't have integrations and I don't have to worry about that. I just have one, partner. I have one, technology I have to support like that. But the needs of the organization may not need that. That may be too big for certain facets of those systems. But because of that one, I hate to say these words, maybe you can edit it, one throat to choke.
Oh, yeah.
One throat to I always say, did you ever do it, though? Did you ever go back to them and say?
You'd be in jail if you did. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny. I've heard that term. We'll leave it at. It's fine. Yes, interesting to me because, some of these systems, these end-to-end full suite systems, of which payroll is possibly one of the most complex pieces. They're relatively rigid, right? They're not particularly flexible. So unless you're very sort of, unless your business is very sort of, I don't want to say monolithic, but you're very, and the word is escaping.
Well, vanilla.
Yeah, you're a vanilla organization. There's not much sort of, variance. Everything is sort of the same kind of thing across the entire organization. Then maybe one of these would work for you. But this entire discussion that we've seen sort of run its course over the past 10 plus years of one suite for all of your HCM, that works for some organizations, maybe some medium-sized businesses, and certainly some smaller businesses. But once you grow in complexity as an enterprise, you will be looking at point solutions for just about everything, at least for some of your regional divisions or departments.
Mm-hmm.
And payroll being one of those, right? There's maybe we could talk a little bit about payroll specifically in terms of what are some of the common sort of pitfalls that we see with some of these systems, payroll, in terms of match fit, not necessarily the functionality, because that has been innovated upon in notable ways across the board in this market space over the past several years. But what are some of the shortcomings that some of these systems have when it comes to some, matching it to the right type of user?
Well, so I would have to say the number one for me is the disconnect between the service provider and what they offer as service level agreement and support and so forth versus what the organization's responsibility is for that. Mm-hmm. So there's really a misinterpretation. I've had a lot of leaders tell me, we paid them for compliance. How did we end up in this non-compliant situation that we're in?
Yeah.
The vendors will often come back and say, we gave you the system that can be built with compliance, but you own it. That piece is very misunderstood in the marketplace. And so I would have to say almost, in the last couple of years, every client has said, well, we bought compliance. Why are we in this situation? And the vendor says, no, you didn't. And here's the T's and C's that excluded us. Plus they say, okay, we had new requirements and we called our service provider or we, called upon various resources to help us build that. And that it's very confused how they build it because the current configuration may have to be reconfigured. And that seems unimaginable. What do you mean? We want to go to this new country or have this new type of employee or buy a new building, whatever it is. Well, why do we have to retrofit everything? I'm just adding this component. And that, again, is a very large struggle with some organizations, I would say. And again, the support model of all of that is very misunderstood.
Very illuminating. Bill, just quickly, in terms of, it sounds to me, that prospective users or buyers of new solutions or replacement solutions for their payroll, workforce management, and the rest of HCM, they could really benefit from just maybe speaking with somebody that can share this information with them, because it sounds like walking into some of these scenarios, some of the buyers they're unaware of what they're really getting into, and so they might benefit from a primer.
Yeah, I think that's really important point. And again, the vendors have technology that works most of the time, but how does it work for the client in what's a scenario? In too many companies, we see buy technology for the sake of technology. They don't buy it for what they're trying to do. We just had one client that was quoted a product from a large vendor, and they asked us to take a look at it. We said, that's the wrong product.
Yeah.
The vendor has a better product for this need. And the vendor was okay with what we had to say. And so they switched their quote, we switched it, and now everybody's happy. So it's really important that it's a little bit cliche and it's a little bit old, Brent, but I still think people process technology is really, really important. And what happens in a lot of technology in implementations, people just look at it from a technology standpoint, not what process we're trying to improve or automate, not what's going to be the effect on the people. And you have to look at those two things first. And then, oh, by the way, we can automate it. That's how it's generally done. And that's what we see works the best. And you have to understand the technology really well, which of course we do, being in this business for so long. But then you can take a look at the client's needs from that perspective as well.
Absolutely. Lisa, any extra closing thoughts here?
Well, I could go on and on, but I would have to say when I met with various folks, what they value the most is sort of this clarity around it's not you. You haven't made a horrible mistake. There's a lot of opportunities, I guess I should say that, because a lot of times when there's a failed implementation or failed payroll, there's a lot of distrust and everything that builds. So just talking about it sometimes helps bring out some of those solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And they need somebody to talk to about it, right? So that's where that sounding board comes in. Lisa, Bill, thank you so much for being my guests on this episode of the podcast. Really fascinating, important topic for folks out there.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.